Many of you who watch my channel regularly will know that I've been talking about something in the last year or so, what I call the 4K fault. Well, this is where a disc just suddenly stops playing, staggers and switches off in the middle. Sometimes it will go through it, but other times just stops and that's it. You've got to somehow get through that chapter. Well, there's some good news and some bad news on it, because I had been fearing a complete disaster because I found so many faulty discs one after the other. But I suppose the best news of all is that the bad news isn't actually that bad. So keep watching to find out more. The 4K fault. I'd found a few discs in quick succession a year, 18 months ago that all displayed a similar fault, and among these was one of my favourite 4K discs, and that is the 4K of Jaws, which early on was available with a slipcover. And this actually arrived through the door the day before release, so I did an early review on that, which Universal have objected to, but I won't go into that here. But as a result of that, I've been on the lookout for a cheap copy, replacement copy of Jaws, and yesterday in the Newbury HMV, £9.99. They've actually had it on sale on their website, I think for half price with a special code, so it was great to see this on the counter in HMV for just £10. So I have a replacement disc and a replacement Blu-ray, actually, only I don't need that, but the 4K from this can go into this lovely original 4K pack, and it didn't cost an awful lot of money. And so that is one of the good news stories about the 4K fault. This one shut down on that beautiful scene where Hooper and Brody are out in the boat at night looking for the shark, and they come across the missing sailor who they go down, the head comes out. You all know the scene, I'm sure, but it goes faulty at that point where you've got that lovely night shot looking at Hooper and Brody on the boat. So that was one of the early ones I found that had the 4K fault. And so while I was in HMV yesterday, I always like to see what has been released, and they did have True Lies in there, but I must admit I can't really generate the enthusiasm for that just yet. Maybe when it's a bit cheaper I'll have a look at it, but for now I'm really happy, and have been for years, with my PAL Laserdisc of True Lies. But here's one that has been featured in Cinema Retro magazine in the last 2 issues. So I've been reading all about the making of Cross of Iron, and it made me realise I'd never seen this Sam Peckinpah classic. So when I saw it on the shelves yesterday, I finally remembered to actually buy it. It's £22.99, but I'm rather looking forward to seeing that, having learned so much about it in Cinema Retro. In their 2 for £30 offer, Rosemary's Baby. A few people had asked me to look at that. I hadn't seen it since a television broadcast when I was probably 14 or 15 years old, so a good excuse to have another look at that. And I was talking to another 4K collector in the Newbury HMV yesterday, looking for a second one in the 2 for £30 deal. I said, "Have you seen Bullet Train? And if so, what did you think of it?" He said, "Well, I'm one of those that really enjoyed it." So I said, "That's good enough for me." So I left with a copy of Bullet Train finally. I find Brad Pitt is always worth looking at, so I'm going to finally take a look at that. So I don't know how many of those I'll do full reviews of. Maybe I'll just do one of those roundup conglomerate review videos, which you can take a look at sometime in the future. But getting back to the 4K fault, a heartbreaking disc to go down again was Tenet. This is a replacement I got in a charity shop for £3.50, and it's perfect, so I was all right there. The funny thing is, it actually just arrived on the shelf of this charity shop after I'd ordered the, what's it called, the first edition from HMV, where it's got the little booklet in it, and that booklet is a cut down of the full-size book, which I've also got, and I love that book. Tells you all about the making of Tenet. So that one went down, and it was actually faulty when I bought it. The menu was displaying a fault, but it didn't affect the running time of the feature originally. And the second time I went to look at it, it started staggering and stopping. And then when I tried it again some months later, it was faulty all over the place. So whatever the problem is, I think it's a laser rot issue, or that's what we used to call it on Laserdisc, where the silver layer starts breaking down. So that's my theory on what it is, but there's all sorts of theories out there as to what has been causing this problem, and many people do ask me if I've tried them on a second player. I have. It's identical on the second player. So it looks to me like there is a manufacturing flaw with a lot of these discs. Now the next one, 2001 A Space Odyssey. This was another one that went down quite early. First time I played all of these discs, they were fine. It was the second time around they were all faulty. But fortunately, I got it from the HMV website a while ago, £10. I think it was a 3 for £30 deal on there. So I've got a replacement 4K in here. They're both identical discs, but that one was an import from Italy because it was cheaper than the big pack they were doing over here, and because I know the film practically off by heart, I thought I'm not going to watch this very often. I'd rather watch my Super 8 print. But it is a very good 4K disc owing to its 65mm origins. Not quite as good as most 65mm productions you'll see that got a 70mm release, but it is very good nevertheless, and a very special disc for anyone who hasn't seen it. So the next one that developed a fault, another quite heartbreaking one, The Shining, and that one went down, just staggered and then wouldn't play at all, and you had to skip about 10 minutes of the film to actually carry on. But yet again, HMV came to the rescue, 3 for £30. So it's not like I've spent £1,000 on a 35mm print and then completely wrecked the print. These are cheap home videos, and I know they're more expensive than Blu-rays and DVDs. Maybe not so expensive as Laserdisc now, if you can find any Laserdiscs, but they're still very cheap, and what great value they are. So far I was thinking when these were turning up, this is about 5 to 10% of my entire collection. And so I was getting a bit concerned. So I started going back and checking loads of discs, and if you can pick them out on here, I've watched quite a few recently, such as Super 8, which I had to do that update review on, First Man, rewatched Dune because I wanted to go and see Dune Part 2, but other events have taken over and I haven't been able to get up to the IMAX to see that 1570 print, one of only a dozen in the world. But it is a blow up from a 4K video. I'm not expecting too much, but I do think it will look very good. Watch the Mission Impossible series, or a few of them again. Fallout is one of them, which is probably the best of the lot, having watched them all again. And one I was a bit concerned about, one of my favourite films, which is Last Night in Soho, and I think that is a modern classic, one of the best films of the last 20-25 years. Watch that one for a second time, the 7th Mission Impossible film. Back to the Future. There's a whole raft of them I watched and checked again, and of them, well, Apollo 11 had already gone down. That one looks to be beyond repair, beyond saving, and finding a second copy of that has proved difficult, and it's always quite expensive even if CEX have it. But I think the Blu-ray, when I watched it, was so comparable to the 4K, I thought, what am I worried about? For the times I'm going to watch it, maybe I should just stick with the Blu-ray. But one that I did come across, and this was interesting. Suzanne, my wife, wanted a cup of tea when we were about 50 minutes into it, and so I put it on pause while she made a cup of tea, came back in, pressed play, and the thing started staggering and breaking up and then wouldn't go any further. And I thought, is it where the laser has actually sat and burned the silver layer of the disc? So not really a big problem, hunter killer. I thought I'd be able to get this quite cheaply from CEX or somewhere else, and in the Bristol CEX I found a second copy of this for £6 when I was there. I think I was lucky enough to get it because on the shelves of CEX they put it in a Blu-ray case because they didn't have the original cover, so I don't know what went on there, but for whatever reason it was then misplaced in the Blu-ray section. So I thought, well, this is a 4K. I went and spoke to the chap at the counter. Sure enough, it was a 4K. And I thought, well, that's a cheap replacement for this. And unbelievably, in almost the identical place, this second copy has got the same problem. It's about 2 minutes earlier, I think. So could it be around a layer change and where you leave it on pause, or maybe the laser just goes over them? If the silver layer is faulty, then the laser comes along. Can it be that laser rot that we had with Laserdisc that causes this? I don't know, but that's a working theory, so one that's up for discussion. but that was a particularly interesting problem. I think that's the 6th that I found I got the 4K fault. Plane that I watched recently is a brand new disc that had to go back because that already had a fault when I played it. I got about 40-50 minutes in, started staggering and stopped, and so we had to then put the Blu-ray in to see the missing sequence to continue with the 4K disc. But the good news is I've been through about 35-40 of the 4Ks I probably wouldn't have watched again for several years, and only Hunter Killer out of all of those so far has displayed what I call the 4K fault. So I think we can all carry on buying without too much concern that there is a generic problem with 4K. That does not appear to be the case, but I do think because the data now is so tiny on these tiny discs that if there is going to be a problem with a home video disc, 4K is more likely to display it. But I do have Blu-rays and plenty of DVDs. I've even got a few Laserdiscs that will occasionally throw a wobbly, and I've got 1 or 2 Laserdiscs that have actually got the famous laser rot, as it was known in those days. But out of the something like 150, 200 Laserdiscs, that's all I've found in all the years I've had them. And one of those discs, the original Star Wars disc, which I think was released in 1982, that is so old now for a Laserdisc, and it possibly was when Laserdisc was in its infancy and they didn't manufacture it too well. That one has got laser rot. It still plays, being as it's not digital, it's an analog system. But the other one I've got, Dante's Peak, was an NTSC disc, a THX disc, and that has got the problem for the first 4 or 5 minutes or so, then it clears up and there's no problem again with that disc. But I suspect that's what the problem here is with the 4Ks. I'm still collecting them, I still love them, there's nothing better. And even when it comes to films like True Lies, I know some people are upset because they've tried to, well, James Cameron has supervised, trying to make the film look as close to something like Tenet as possible, which is not possible because this was shot 1570 and 70mm, so you're not going to get that from a Super 35. But I think that's what they're trying to do, because the bulk of people who buy a 4K disc, they're not really as enthusiastic or as nitpicky as us that will look at every frame and think, oh, that's not right. And so we really ought to stop doing this. And I think Jeff at Films at Home, he's called Jeff Rousio now, is he? Which I would call it Films at Home with Jeff Rousio to start with. So maybe that's a tip for you there, Jeff, if things don't take off as you hope. But I think Jeff mentioned this, that we're taking things too seriously. He's absolutely right. I think we've got to accept that Aliens is going to be put through the mill a bit to try and make it look a little more like something as perfect as Tenet. And you can understand it. For the most people who buy these 4K discs, they just want to sit back and watch something that looks as perfect as other 4K discs. And it's not really possible with 1A5 to 1 35mm productions and Super 35 productions blown up to 235, 240 to 1. So anyway, that's my update on the 4K fault. Keep watching. I'll probably bring you some reviews of 1 or 2 of these recent purchases, such as Cross of Iron. Might even do an update on Jaws when I finally get to watch that, but that might not be for several years. I just got to hope the 4K disc in here is perfect. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please give it a like and perhaps consider subscribing so I'll be encouraged to carry on creating content like this. Until the next video, bye bye for now.